friend of mine, and he tells me that he grew up with John, and tells me a little bit about him, and it's just a tragedy. So the band starts off the second half of the night, and just as they're finishing and I'm getting hammered, I hear the singer announce a special request, and he says, "This is for John Murray," and he sings "Only Our Rivers Run Free." And I look up, and there's emotion all over this guy's face, and the crowd realise in the elms that this is different, something's going on here. And there's almost absolute silence. And then, when it's over, I nod over to him, and I have to leave. So I'm living in University Street at the time, so I leave the pub. All my buddies are still, all my friends are still there, and I leave the pub, and I head down back to University Street. And I realised that John actually lived in the Holy Land, somewhere in the Holy Land. So I walk around the Holy Lands trying to find the house. And I think I'm in Damascus Street when I hear the noise at the bottom of the street. And I look down and I see one of the roster players, Ash Armstrong, standing at the door. And I realise that this is the Wake House. But in that moment, I also realised that I'm too drunk to go into the house. So across the street, and I walk down to the bottom of Damascus Street, and I sit on the grass down there, and I listen to the mourners, and I cry my eyes out. And that's a memory that I had no recollection of. That memory was completely blacked out. I had no idea that had happened until the sequence of events had happened from that play. And then I started remembering other things. And I couldn't write stand-up, I just started remembering other things. I remember my first black British soldier. It's not racist, it was in Divis Flats, and he was a black paratrooper. He had on the red thing. And I remember because my father, who never really took much, he never gave the British soldiers any time at all. He just answered their questions because he knew they had the guns, and that was it. But you could just see that he had a real distaste for it. But the only time I ever saw him react was when that day of the Black British Soldier. It was 1971, and the reason he reacted was because he had a big love for civil rights in America and a big love for jazz. He told me the first black person he ever saw was a guy called Louis Armstrong when he hitchhiked to Dublin to watch him play in Dublin, and he couldn't believe that a black man would put on that uniform after what the British had done to his people. And that stuck with me. And then other memories kept flooding back. For example, 1976, my mother's at home and she wants to go out to vote, and she's going, "Where is he? Where is he? He's on the drink with Stuart." Sorry, Paul. So my mother's there, and I'm looking at the TV and I see this white car, and I go, "Well, that looks like Daddy's car." And she goes, "Oh, so it does." And the next thing, the car explodes. And apparently what happened was my father was being held at gunpoint while his car was being used to blow up a polling station. So he got out of that one. And then I do remember, there wasn't much sectarian, there was no sectarianism in our house, it was just a lot of love. But I do remember when we were up in Antrim, in Dunloy, there was a county final, and this is bizarre, but I was just a kid, but the Orange men were marching in Dunloy, side by side with all the people going to the hurling match, and nobody was giving anybody any attention, but the Orange men were just the big red faces, and I said, "Daddy," I was just a kid, I said, "Daddy, what are the Orange men marching for?" And he said, "Badness, son, badness." That's all. So I collected all these memories, and before I knew it, I had 31 typed pages. I've shown Danny this too, and I had still no idea what I was going to do with it all. I just wanted to get back to doing stand-up, and then John came into my head and he goes, "You need to start performing this." And I said to him, "Are you crazy? I'm a stand-up. This is way too heavy for me." I know I'm talking to a dead man and I'm telling him he's crazy, but so 6 months go by, and I'm thinking, I might write something, but there's no way I could perform this as stand-up. So 6 months go by, and I happened to watch two stand-up specials. One was on Netflix, and the other was on HBO. The one on Netflix was called Nanette by Hannah Gadsby, and then there was one on HBO called The Great Depression by a guy called Gary Gulman. And they were both stand-up specials, but Hannah Gadsby talks about the sexual abuse she suffered in her Nanette thing. You should watch this, and it's fantastic, and it works. I've never seen anybody do it like that before, and I'm like, that's interesting. And then Gary Gulman does this thing called the depression. He suffers massive depression. I've worked with Gary in Boston, and I had no idea this was that he suffered from depression. And he talks about the time he went to get fentanyl off a specialist, and you can only get fentanyl apparently if you can only take it in the office of the practitioner, and it has to work almost instantly or you don't get it again. So the first time it works, and the second time he goes back, it doesn't work, so they have to stop giving him the fentanyl. So he can't go back, and he loves the feeling he gets from fentanyl. So he says, "I went back a couple of times dressed as a horse, but I think the guy spotted my accent." So it was dark, but it was funny. And then what happened was I went to the Wilbur Theatre in Boston, and I watched a guy called Ryan Hamilton, and his approach to stand-up totally changed the way that I now want to do stand-up, and that kind of blew my mind. So I make a deal with Minto. I tell him, okay, Minto, I'll contact the fella, and I'll ask them if they'd be interested in me putting on a performance piece. But if they say no, you need to leave my head and let me get back to writing stand-up. So Minto agrees. And I write this guy called Danny Morrison. He's sitting down here. I think it was around 2019. And I pitch him the idea, and I tell him, of the backstory of what I'm telling you now. And Danny says, can you do it in August 2020? And I go, and I say, look, I'll work on it for a few months, and I'll let you know. And then, obviously, COVID hits. And I'm thinking to myself, happy days, I'm in lockdown, I have plenty of time to write about this. But nothing goes the way. I get locked down in Boston for 72 days. I work at a special needs school called Perkins. You probably have never heard of it, but you may have heard of Helen Keller. She was the most famous student at it. So I worked there, and they were looking for volunteers. To decide to be locked down, and I got locked down for 72 days, and it almost drove me mental. And I wasn't able to read, and I love to read. This is my favourite event, and I wasn't able to write anything, and I was in a bad place. And I have to say, I did give the courage to reach out and ask people for help, and I was able to dig my way out of the depression I was in. And then, sorry. So I want to take a little drink, please. And then I was able to get out of it, and I started writing this again. And then on Tuesday night, Danny phoned me and said, "What are you doing on Thursday?" And so I'm here to do this. I haven't fully developed this yet, and I don't know where it's going, but I know that I don't want. When you're a writer, you have to ask yourself certain questions about what you're doing, and I have, for this piece to work, I have several requirements which I'm still working on. The first thing that I said to myself, I can't trivialize the troubles, the conflict. I don't want to make it sound flippant, and I don't want my humour to be at anyone's expense. And I don't want this to be a piece about self-indulgence. Look at poor me. There has to be no ego in this. These are my rules that I'm setting out. And I've decided to try and tell the story as a narrator and have my family and friends be the protagonist, which is quite easy when you're a kid. That's the first part when I'm a kid. But it's harder to do that when you're getting older. And I think I have about 25 minutes at the minute put together. And I don't want to tell it chronologically, because there's nothing as bad as sitting and listening to me talking and then going, fuck, 25 minutes, we're not even at 1980 yet. So I'll tell you another few stories. I'll tell you another few stories. In 1970, my father taught me had three great things: education, travel, and learning musical instruments. So one Christmas, 1975, he brings me down to Matchett's and he buys me a guitar. And he says to me, "Seamus, there'll be a guy coming to give you guitar lessons. His name's Billy. He's a jazz player and a blues player." So that was December. January, Billy doesn't show up. And then February, Billy doesn't show up either. And March, I'm going, "Mother, where's Billy?" And she goes, "Oh, no, he's kind of busy." So it turns out that Billy actually is in Crumlin Road Jail. He's been arrested. He was in the IRA. Who knew the IRA had a jazz wing? Billy's in the IRA, and I think he gets 15 years. And he's kind of lucky because he just gets in under the cusp of political status. He's one of the last prisoners to get that, because after that, and after 76, I think they tried to criminalise the prisoners. So he just get in under that. But what happened was, about April, I was told this, and I was devastated. For Billy and for my guitar lessons, but mostly for Billy. So this man stepped up to give me guitar lessons, my Uncle Eamon. And my Uncle Eamon, for us people here know me, he's a fantastic guy. And his humour is what led me on this path to do stand-up, and his influence. And Eamon came into the house and he started giving me guitar lessons. But he was mainly making everybody in my house laugh. And I said, "You know what? I kind of want to do that." So that's what happened. He even gave me this guitar lesson. I learned a bit of guitar. I did travel all over the world. I've travelled where have I lived? Sydney. I'm not name dropping here. Sydney, Boston. I lived in Brittany for a while. And here's what I learned. I'm a painter and decorator too by trade. Here's what I learned. Painting a wall in Ballymurphy is much the same as painting a wall in Sydney, Brisbane, Boston, or Paris. But here's the difference. Somebody in Ballymurphy will give you a cup of tea and a biscuit. Nobody else gives you anything. But I was like, because that was less dangerous than throwing stones. And I said, when can I throw stones? And I think the guy in charge, I don't know his name, he was about 15, he says, listen, what do you say? I said, I'm mute. He says, when you're 9